I love that.
Do you know that song, Jared?
I do not know.
She got those apple bottom jeans, boots with the fur, The whole club was looking at her. Woo! She hit the flow.
Next
thing you know, shorty got low.
That's an old one.
Well, that's an old one.
Welcome to Pushing Past Polite, where we talk about what matters, sing ridiculous songs, and hopefully make the world more just in the process. I'm Laura.
I'm Kori, and we have a special guest with us today.
Is it me?
It is you.
It's
Hooray.
you. Would you like to? I want you to say a little bit more about, who you are and how you show up in the world in a minute. But can you just introduce yourself really quickly?
I would love to. So I'm Jared Boyce, and I have the pleasure of knowing the two lovely hosts of this show for a little while. I think, Laura, we met about 2 years ago at this point, late 2022, though I certainly heard your name in very complimentary ways floating around the office well before then. And I think, Kori, we've known each other for about 6 years, I want to say. And I think one of our first interactions was when you were part of a team co-leading some trainings and workshops internally to our former workplace that you won an award for, if I am remembering correctly.
That sounds right.
And that is how I know both of you and our first memories in our prior employers.
So a former coworker who we keep people. We're collecting good people as we go. And Jared is
one of the
definitely
best huggers on the planet.
Oh, he is. From
Jared
what I hear.
gives amazing hugs.
Takes one to know one, Kori.
I'm jealous. I've never met you in person to be able to claim that, but I believe it. These are good reviews.
Well, we need to plan a grant proposal for to do that empirical testing sometime, I think.
What makes a good hug?
I love it.
I love that too. So Jared's with us today. We're so happy. We're going to dig in a little bit more and learn more about what's on his mind in just a minute. But just wanted to do a quick holiday touch base. Is everybody keeping sanity? We're 2 weeks out? Kori, you've started Elf on the Shelf.
I'm done. I'm good.
You're done?
I've distributed all of the gifts for the school people. Daniel is doing his team. Santa Claus is coming to town, so the Santa Claus things, I believe, are close in close proximity. And then the boys wanted some suitcases because we're going to be traveling, so we have it's all here. I have the suitcases, a bunch of clothes. I'm going to pack the suitcases with clothes, so and toiletries, like travel stuff.
Gifts and a gift. That's fun. Pull it all out.
We have one big gift for them to share. And my parents have been sending things. My mother-in-law is in town, so she's been sending things. She has a whole closet full of stuff downstairs. So
Operation Wrapping can commence.
And there won't be a lot of that. Not for me.
Okay.
Santa Claus doesn't wrap gifts in our house. It's like
It's
the Santa Claus.
Smart.
That's how you differentiate. The Santa Claus gifts are the ones that are just there placed. And then the other gifts get wrapped. So, but since we're doing a suitcase, we're not going to be I'm not going to wrap the suitcase.
So smart. You are so smart. Meanwhile, I'm looking at all these boxes behind me and little bitty intricate things and going, deep regret for not starting that tradition.
It's also where are the people who do enjoy doing that? And I would pay for that service. Here, it's like Paper Source. It's $8 a gift.
That's high.
And there's another company. It's $15 a gift.
There's someone here locally in Richmond. If anybody, I'll put this in the show notes if anybody needs it.
Ellie.
Well, yeah, my daughter will do it too. But there's someone who does it because she enjoys it and does it for charity. You donate per present. The recommended donation is $2. And she picks a charity for the season. She provides all the wrapping. You don't even need to bring paper. Kori's ready to drive to Richmond to drop off all her gifts.
That is worth the
So-
3-hour drive.
Yep. There you come hang out with me. We'll get a little drinky, get your presents wrapped.
Oh, wow.
Jared, how about you? What do holidays look like for you? Are you getting ready? Is there a lot of prep or is it pretty easy?
Holidays have become simpler and less dramatic over the years for me, I'm pleased to report. Not necessarily for good reasons, but the result is pleasant.
Okay.
So growing up, Thanksgiving was going to visit my dad's parents, and they're not with us anymore.
Mhm.
And then during the period of time when I was married, Thanksgiving often looked like going to visit my in-laws, whom are very lovely people, and there's some family dynamics, as there always are.
Mhm.
And now that I am no longer married, just like keeping things closer to home is just simpler.
Mhm.
And for me this year with Thanksgiving, my mother was very upfront with me and said, Jared, you can do whatever you want for Thanksgiving because this is what we're going to do with just a few family friends. And it's going to be chaotic, not dramatic, but chaotic, if that
Yeah.
distinction makes sense.
Mhm.
And I just went to a friend's Friendsgiving and spent the day there. And it was delightful. And it was like no guilt. It was no shame.
Yep.
It was just,
Nice.
we're all, what's going to make the most people the most happy and give us what we need. And for
Ooh, I
me,
love
that was
that.
going to a Friendsgiving and,
Love it.
having some beautiful time there. And then like for Christmas and New Year's, it's, our Christmas has become simpler as my sister and I have gotten older, if that
Mhm.
makes sense.
Mhm.
And so like, that's just a very simple, straightforward thing. New Year's used to be on with my mother's parents who are no longer with us. And so this year I'm going to go visit some friends in Chico, whom I try to see several times per year. And
Nice.
unfortunately this year, because of me getting sick or one of them getting sick, many of our trips to visit one another have been canceled. So like, we're kind of like, I'll say I'm a little bit desperate. I'm a little bit desperate to see them because I miss them.
Oh,
Like,
you're
they're-
overdue. They need a hug. You need a hug.
I need a
And-
hug from
And
them.
those hugs are good. And that transfer of energy in the hugs are nice.
Yeah.
Just like that, like you feel connected. Giving Jared a hug, it's like that was when I was like, oh yeah, I liked this person, but like now I feel a connection to this person.
Aw.
Thank
I
you.
love that. Well, just imagine if you're feeling you need the hug. Imagine how those huggy recipients of your hugs are feeling right now. Chico is hurting. They need you. Get there.
Yes, ma'am. I didn't
I
know I was
love
going to be bossed around today, but I could take this. I could do
Lovingly, only lovingly.
this. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm hearing simpler. I'm
Wait.
hearing it's handled.
Jared's not finished, Laura.
Oh, sorry.
Oh,
Go.
I was going to give a fun fact on hugging.
Yeah.
Now, to be clear for your listeners, I'm not a medical doctor. This is not medical advice. And what I've heard is that in general, men need more physical contact for the same amount of oxytocin release. So if anything, you should encourage the men in your life who could use a little more connection. Like, you know what? Give that hug another like 2 or 3 seconds. Just like sink into that hug a little bit more.
I love that. I'll be
I
right
like
back.
that.
Let me get my husband's teleworking. I'll be right back.
Right.
Hey, honey, can you come
Hey,
downstairs?
Let me help you. I got
Yeah.
something for you.
Get a little oxytocin hit for you. Stretch a day. Oh, that's so cute. I love that.
Yeah, it's a hell of a drug.
Mhm.
Just a little bit of hug for a little bit of hormone.
Hugs for hormones.
Set up a little,
Put it on a
little booth.
t-shirt.
I'm thinking a kissing booth. Hugs for hormone. Promise not creepy underneath in
Yeah,
parentheses.
Not creepy, I swear.
Oh my God.
That came out a little bit somethinger than I intended it, but I'm going to go.
Something or
It has been immortalized. So there we go.
Yeah.
hugs for hormones.
Hugs for hormones. I'm
Done.
with it.
I'm going to
Mhm.
volunteer at the middle school today. Maybe I should see if I
Yeah,
can
definitely not there.
popularize
Not
that
there.
phrase.
You will never be allowed back at the middle school.
No.
Mm-mm. You'll be on a list.
I'm
You'll
bringing
be on a list.
Yeah, that phrase, and I'm bringing sugar. We're doing a hot chocolate bar for the kids during their lunches today. So the thought of sugar and hormones, we're going to go ahead and pass on that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of hormones in middle school, so you don't need to. It doesn't need any extra hugs.
Maybe
over
I'll
there.
bring them.
No
They give me.
extra
Hey, you know
hugs.
what? I'm perimenopausal. Why don't I take some of their
Right.
hormones back?
This
Maybe
sounds
it'll
like
level you out.
This
It
sounds like an
might.
excellent opportunity for consent with personal touch.
Yes.
Like to the
Yeah.
adolescents in our life, remember to like ask before you give someone a hug.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and transfer
Yes.
and give them that hormone boost. Everyone doesn't want hormones from you, kid.
Yeah, no, or the smell, or any of that. Any of that.
Yes.
Oh, I love it. So Kori and I have routinely received emails the morning after a new episode drops of this podcast from this sweet friend of ours, from Jared, who will give us a thoughtful analysis or something he found intriguing or something he has more questions about, or this echoes true in my life because blah blah blah. And it's always like, it's such a gift to know somebody is out there listening to you, and someone who we really respect and is so thoughtful gives his time in that way. Yeah, no, we love you. You're one
We
of our
do.
faves. So we said, yeah, if we ever do a guest situation, we're gonna need to have this guy on because he's always got some great thoughts.
It is a pleasure to serve.
So Jared, tell people who don't know you. We again are the lucky few here. But like, how do you show up in the world? Like, if you were to describe yourself to someone or to try to introduce someone to you for the first time, what would you say?
Ooh, okay. Jared in 30 seconds. I would
Mhm.
say I love board games. I grew up on board games. I remember learning probability from my dad doing dice roll calculations. Love computer games. I would say that I'm a former teacher and high school administrator. Now I do education research, which is how the three of us met and came together. And I would also say that I'm autistic. And on one hand, it's one of many things about my life. And on another hand, I can imagine a Jared who, for example, is not gay. I am gay, but I can imagine a Jared who wasn't. Imagining a Jared who's not male, harder, but I might be able to get there.
Mhm.
But, the more I've reflected on it, the more I feel like, you know what? I can't imagine a Jared who's not autistic.
Hmm.
And just because that just literally the world gets filtered through my brain and my brain is just wired differently. And I just can't imagine myself out of that, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Not that I'm trying to, but more just in terms of sequencing, how close is something to your core identity?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I want to tie this into something about how Kori and I got to know each other back in the day, because Kori, I remember one of the conversations we had back in 2022, where you were on our division's DEI committee. I was upcoming on the next round of the division's DEI committee. And I remember saying, like, just talking about some of the messaging and training that we've had over the years and the way in which I have felt somewhat othered by it, in the way that disabilities and different challenges get very marginalized. And I acknowledge, like, hey, Kori, I want to acknowledge you are in the room and that you planned and led some of these things. I don't want to call you out. I want to be clear, because being clear is being kind. And I remember, like, the way I remember that meeting, Kori, is like, you were the one saying, Jared, we need more of this. This is what the work looks like. And I just remember how warmly and authentically you modeled what it means to take some feedback, much of which was not about you or your trainings, to be abundantly clear. And how you're like, Jared, you are teaching me now. This is a gift. And anyone who views this feedback not as a gift is doing it wrong.
Mm.
And I'm like, okay, Kori is safe. Like, that was when, you were on like the 98% mark on safety. And I'm like, and this is Kori topping it out to now she's a sure thing.
Aww.
And that's just a memory I have of you and what it means to be safe for other people in the workplace, which I know is one of the themes that you've talked about on your past episodes.
Wow, Jared, now I'm all teary-eyed over here. It's too early to be teary-eyed.
Oh.
That's so beautiful. But I mean, I don't remember that, but that sounds right, because that's the truth. If
Mhm.
we're talking about creating spaces of inclusion and belonging, then how do we say to somebody who's telling us that they don't feel like they're being heard or included, and that what we're doing to create spaces of inclusion is actually marginalizing them?
Mhm.
How do we not take that as feedback necessary to integrate into our work?
Mhm.
Like, that's absolutely critical. You work with us, so you feeling that you matters.
Mhm.
Strong agree.
And it reminds us too that, identities are complex. They're not single facets, right? Being, a white woman, a black woman. Okay, so we've got gender and we've got race, but there's so many other dimensions of that, right? There's,
Mm-hmm.
our proximity to power or our marginalization from power can look lots of different ways. It can be about ableism, it can be about, shape of body or, the size of your bodies, your sexuality as well as your gender, all these different components. So it's a good reminder as we think about DEI that it's not just about race, right? That's something that you can't hide about yourself, which is why it's particularly salient and powerful. But there are lots of other dimensions that maybe people don't think of. So, um, good reminder for us for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jared.
Well, thank you. I want to piggyback off of that, Laura, because one of the things that you both have made me think about over the last couple of months was one of your November episodes where, Laura, you were sharing like being very included and thankful for being in a predominantly of color space. And I remember you were asking Kori, I would say half rhetorically, half seriously, a little bit like, I imagine this takes some work to be this welcoming. Like, why would people, especially on the racial dimension, being of color in the US, like go out of their way so much to include white people and not just, keep a little bit more to themselves in certain ways? And I'm paraphrasing awkwardly, not having any private
Not at all.
language. And I remember Kori's response being like, well, I hear that, Laura, but what's the alternative? Like what's the alternative here? Like, can you imagine what that would look like if just did not, we people of color, and in particular Black people, just did not interface with white people? And I thought that was a productive exploration about just assumptions people make about just identity, but also certain realities of numbers of people, where those people occur, the costs to not interacting. And that made me just think for myself. I was just like, thank you, Kori. I love that you said that, because for me, it's not race. For those of you who are listening, I am a white man. For me, it's the autistic allistic divide, where there's about 2% of the United States that's on the autistic spectrum, and there's 98% of y'all who are allistic. And let me tell you, with love, some of you are just so messy so much of the time.
I wish I could gift you my brain to see you the way I see you, you messy
Oh,
fools.
messy fools, Lord.
And I'm glad we can laugh about that. But like, I have a similar reaction, which is just like, I love the autistic friends I have, but I also love the allistic friends I have. And I'd be worse off not interfacing with allistic people. But also my life would just be so much smaller. Like there's just 98% of the population. Yeah.
I would love to tell you that question was asked rhetorically. Sadly, it was not. I was serious because, and I don't mean like interface in terms of just daily interactions, but the idea of like letting someone into your circle of trust. If I were someone who was of marginalized identities and really struggled with microaggressive behaviors, as I know that you do and have, I would really have a hard time with that. And that shows
Can
my
I
privilege.
tell you something that's actually interesting?
What's that?
Is that's what white people actually do. That's what white people do. White people are the people who are more exclusionary. That you'll see that people who grew up around people of color, had friends in elementary school, high school, the farther in education they progress, the whiter their spaces start to become. Right? And so it's
I see that in my own life.
Yeah.
I see that.
Yeah. And so it's very much like, because of the way our society has been set up, we, Black folks, brown people, people who have any kind of difference from the, Protestant, male, Christian, heterosexual, cisgender, like all of that stuff, right? It's like that space is an exclusionary space. And there are groups that have like tighter associations to that space. And you see that people will get white, their spaces become more white and more white and more white. But people who are of color, their spaces stay diverse, but they might stay separated, right? Like I have some spaces that are much more predominantly Black, and I live in a community that is predominantly Black.
On
because
purpose.
that on purpose, because that creates a sense of safety for me in my community to be able to move about in everywhere we go, the grocery store, the Home Depot, the post office, wherever we're seeing people that look like us, right? But also historically in the United States, when Black people did things like that, white people came and burned it the fuck down. Like literally. It was like white rage, and
Tulsa.
not just Tulsa. There are hundreds
It's
of
just
these
an example.
stories.
Yep, but totally.
Yeah, but it's like burned it to the ground. So that's also like part of the historical embedded incentive or reminder that people say things like, why don't you go back to where you came from? Or why don't you start doing your own whatever? But the reality is, if we start doing our own whatever and are thriving, somebody's going to come and burn it to the ground.
Weaponized mass envy.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
I like that. I hadn't even thought about it like that, Jared.
Well, it becomes an identity thread. So it's not just weaponized mass envy, but it becomes this collective identity thread where if I on the hierarchy am at level, like, where lower is better. So like level 1 would be the top level, right? Like if it's like, you know what, I'm a level 2 kind of person and I live in this very hierarchical way, and these level 4 people are thriving, that doesn't just hit a collective mass envy. It hits an identity threat because now if you're doing better than I am I really level 2?
Right.
And it just becomes this worldview threat where it's like, this must be reconciled. Like, heaven forbid my view of the world change. No, the world must change to meet my view of it. Because it is too scary for me to admit that I am wrong.
Yeah.
Or to see commonality and connection with someone who I perceive as lower than, right?
As level 4.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Totally. Yeah. And even I think, Kori, your example of, Tulsa and other such Black community massacres, like totally valid. And I think about the more insidious ways this happens, right? Why is my circle more white? Well, redlining and development and who could get mortgages and where is, this is where my home is. And as a result of the way that schools are funded and boundaries are drawn, guess what? The people who go to my school look a lot like me and my kids, et cetera, right? So there's the really awful, hateful shit. And then there's also the latent, the more insidious policy
The quiet,
pieces.
awful, hateful shit.
That's
There's
exactly
the
right.
loud, awful, hateful shit.
The
and the quiet,
megaphone,
awful, hateful shit.
the megaphone and the whispers, right?
Exactly.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Which again goes back to like what Jared said in terms of our discussion about othering. It's that othering is how we maintain those hierarchies, right? If we can keep othering people out, even someone who may present as being at a certain place in the hierarchy, if we can figure out ways to other them, then it helps us to maintain the tight-knitness of this space.
And I think that I want to yes and that and circle back to what Laura said about certain identities being more visible than others. So Kori, I relayed a very positive interaction you and I had across a racial and neurological wiring divide. I can also think of a less productive interaction I've had with a different coworker, a woman of color, where we were having a conversation about race and we were both getting a bit activated in the conversation. And she took a moment to pause and tell me how she was hearing me. And I want to let her conversation be private. I'll share how I paraphrased that. How I paraphrased it was, what I hear you saying is you're experiencing me as being confrontational and being very literal with your language and picking over your words. And also, I'm focusing overly narrowly on this specific instance we're talking about, and I'm not bringing in other important factors that you value. And she said, yes, that's what I'm saying to you. And I said, okay. So, and one of the things she had also said is, Jared, you're being very white right now. And that's how she had unpacked it. And I said to her, okay, so I'd like to ask you a question on that. And she said, yes. And I said, why do you think I'm being very white right now, as opposed to being very autistic right now? Because autistic people often are much more direct. Autistic people are often much more literal with language. And autistic people often, especially when activated, if you are not explicitly invoking context, many of us will not automatically pull the context you are thinking of because that is just something that we make fewer inferential leaps in many ways. And it's like, you haven't brought this into the conversation. That's not a part of the conversation. And she looked very surprised that that was my response. And I want to be clear. I'm not saying I showed up in that conversation perfectly. Chances are I could have done something better, developmental lens on my own understandings of certain things.
Right.
Yet in that moment, at the risk of self-aggrandizing, as we all can do it to ourselves, I hope she received it as an opportunity to expand her imagination a bit, that what she was noticing may not have been what she was seeing on my skin, and more importantly, socialization around that. But she was seeing something else that was going on that was a little bit more covert that she had not thought about. And yeah, I think it does just get very messy because there's ways in which both of us may have felt othered in that conversation, based on what each of us was bringing to it. And I know that's just very tough to navigate because I don't want to negate her experience, but I kind of also don't want to negate mine. And I was trying to have the conversation as best I can, given how my brain is wired. Yeah.
But the thing is that I appreciate about what you're saying is you were having a conversation, right?
Yes.
And so the more of those that take place, the more times, hopefully, it's like creates opportunity for more understanding. One of the things I so appreciate about you, Jared, and in the way that we communicate, not just like having difficult conversations, but even just in meetings, right? Is you re-share what you think you're hearing before you comment or respond, right?
Yes.
Which creates an opportunity for those who have shared to clarify, to reshare, to reframe, to add context if necessary before you respond. And it also gives everyone in the room a glimpse into how your brain is processing the information that is being communicated.
Yes. You are the king of active listening and summarizing. And it's amazing.
It's a magical thing.
It's amazing.
It really is.
It's if I could say like there's a quote that sums up the mode of most frequently used phrase. What I think I hear you saying is
yes.
And I love that because it's not you're saying this. It's like what it's kind of a gut check, right? Like I want to make sure before I respond. And I will tell you, my brain is not as fast as that, right? My brain is thinking, I need to respond. I got to hold this idea in my head because they said something and this rubbed me the wrong way. And I try not to be, right? I try to slow it down and put my feelings aside. But you're so good at like summarizing, creating that, like reflecting back what you heard and still holding your piece of the things you're thinking at bay. It's so amazing. I think it's something we all could learn from.
Another gift you have is the and.
Yes.
You do that in your everyday conversation. I'm going to yes and this.
Yes. You're the master. Yeah. You're like an improv god. You're like, yeah. Like, I'm just picturing like SNL, Second City, like all these people. Yes. And it's not a no, but it's always a yes. And you're always acknowledging something that other people are saying then feeling. And you add your nuance or your spin or your take on it. It's awesome.
Well, thank you both. I'm gonna rub those in. One of the principals I used to work with, she noticed her students couldn't take compliments. So she taught them to if you get a compliment and you don't know what to do with it, you grab it out of the air and you put your hand on your chest and you just rub that compliment in.
Oh, I love
and
that.
She taught that to me back in 2012. And I'm just like, I love that.
I love that.
Put that compliment in. No, thank you both. Paraphrasing is a great communication skill because, among other things, I'm going to yes and what you said about it, Laura. It's a both ways. It's like I'm hearing you, but as I paraphrase you, you're hearing me. It's like a dual understanding.
Yep.
Another lovely thing about paraphrasing as a skill is it works when other people know you're doing it. There are certain communication skills where when someone figures it out, they might feel a little bit manipulated or a little something. But paraphrasing is like, it's very overt, it's very transparent, and it still works when everyone knows what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You bring up transparency. Yeah, like it feels like we're on a level playing field because I'm making sure that we both understand each other, and that way we can move forward in the conversation.
Mhm. Yeah. It's like, that's been a really helpful skill for me because I have found that I am regularly misunderstanding other people, see neurological wiring, and also regularly being misunderstood.
Yes.
And so like, it is a great two-way skill
Mhm.
where like, it just is like, are we all talking about the same thing here?
And sometimes we're not.
Exactly. Right.
Mhm.
And it's just a really good gut check. And it's a really good way of making sure we're in sync. And like you said, Laura, it slows the conversation down a little bit.
Mhm.
Like I love the witty back and forth and the repartee. And for certain conversations, it's like, you know what, maybe letting it sink in a little bit longer, maybe checking, maybe saying it a different way. Yeah.
Mhm. Love it.
Really good skill. Another
Mhm.
one, I'm going to drop another one that I've been practicing the last couple of years, which is when you're talking to someone, I can find that there's a temptation to only respond to either the first thing they said or the last thing they said. And if it's the first thing, then I find I don't do a good job of listening
Mhm.
after that
Mhm.
first thing. And if it's the last thing, I find that I often overly fixate on that and not what led there. So something I've been working on the last couple of years is when someone's talking to me, I want to remember the first and the last thing that they said, which then helps me remember what's in the middle too. But
Mhm.
just like,
Hmm.
don't just remember the first or the last thing, remember both.
It's so interesting you say that because I feel like that's true for me even when I'm responding to text messages, right? It's like I'll read a whole message
Mm.
and I'll start responding to the first or the last thing in my response. And so I have been pausing to go back and make sure I'm responding to the full message, right? So for example, if someone's telling me in the message that somebody was sick and that's why I haven't heard from them, and then they're responding to whatever I had initially texted them about, I try not to skip over the thing that they were saying is going on. Like I try to comment back like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't realize thank you for sharing. How is everyone doing now? Are people feeling better? Is it back on the mend?" And then move along to the next thing.
Right.
Because you're right. In acknowledging the fullness of what someone says, it supports that idea of like, I'm actually really hearing you.
Mm.
I'm hearing you to understand, empathize, be compassionate, and connected to what you're saying. And I'm not just hearing you to extract information
For
or
a
get what I need
transaction.
from you. It's not transactional. It
Yeah.
feels more holistic. Yeah.
Mhm. And sometimes what I've done is I've even just said things like, you said a lot right there, and I'm genuinely not sure where to start responding because I'm
Mhm.
worried that if I respond to the wrong thing first, then I'll be missing out something else very important to what you said. And just like, again, just being very transparent with that. Like,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. You said a lot right there.
You messy allistic fool. Can you just slow it down? Why? You need to work on brevity and you need to talk to somebody about that. Oh my God, that's so funny. Okay, so what are the other things we wanted to ask you? We wanted to talk a little bit about how you showed up in the world and why we love you. And well, there are a million reasons why we love you. The hugs, the great listening, the SNL improv god, all of that. But also like what's on your mind as we're entering end of the year, beginning of 2025, all that's coming with that.
Mhm.
Like, what's on your mind? What are the things that you're worried about, concerned about, excited about? Tell us what you want to, what would you like to talk about in that regard?
Yeah. So it's hard for me to think about what's coming next year without thinking about politics. And I know
Mhm.
you both shared some of your feelings on politics. I've been having similar conversations in some of my spaces. Um, I'm feeling disappointed, but not surprised, if that makes
Yep,
sense.
completely.
And there are some people in my social circle who are more devastated than disappointed. And
Yeah.
I want to welcome their feelings while not being overwhelmed by them myself.
Yes.
And I
Say
think
that again, please.
I want to welcome their feelings without being overwhelmed by them myself.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I'm struggling with in terms of supporting my friends is that, okay, here's another Jaredism, which is, I don't know how to say this well, so I'm going to say it awkwardly.
Perfect.
Which it, like, there's the age-old question of, like, in a diverse society, to what extent do we need to be intolerant of intolerance, right? And there's a lot of complexity there. And one of the things I'm struggling with, though, over the last months plus has been the way in which some people whom I care for and respect deeply have been vilifying, quote, the other side, or vilifying those people. And I don't like vilifying people to prove that vilifying people is wrong. I think like there is just something very antithetical there. I'm fine to critique ideas. I'm fine to critique behavior, but I really do not like vilifying people as people. Like if you for me, if I genuinely believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every human being, then it's very hard for me to vilify that. And again, I can vilify the behavior,
Yes.
but vilifying the people. And one of the ways this has shown up recently is after the election, I went to Dallas, Texas. I went to visit a friend of mine's parents who are lovely, doting, adorable Jewish grandparents in all the best ways and stereotypes. And then to go to a board game convention there because, again, I love board games. And
we led with that.
We did lead with that. I am Jared of the board games.
And when I got back, I got some people saying, like, was it okay going to Texas? Like, did you feel safe? Like, did you interact with any of those people in Dallas? It's like, you know what? Overwhelmingly, the people I've met in Dallas are, number one, human. Like, can we just start with they're human? They're not like aliens or extraterrestrials. Like they're humans. They're flesh and blood humans like everyone. And overwhelmingly, like the vast majority of people I've met there, just like most other places in this world, people are at a minimum, respectful and polite, and at a maximum, delightful, wholesome individuals who are incredibly warm and welcoming, regardless of some disagreements we may have on some things. And I've gotten this for years because back when I was married, most of my in-laws lived in Dallas, Texas. So that's where we would go visit my husband's side of the family. And I would get similar, like, oh, Jared, did you feel safe? Did they welcome? It's like, some of them I might choose not to be friends with if we didn't have the familial connection. But again, how many families could say that, right? That's just life. But like, they were incredibly welcoming, like of a similarly gendered relationship. Like, keep your stereotypes to yourself. Thank you very much. Like, these are lovely, welcoming people too. And I really struggle with that. The way in which we assume, I don't know, it's messy because we do have aggregate data on certain behavior, and we know that certain aggregate behavior comes from places. And I'm sounding very ed researchery, I know when I say that, right? But like, for me, when I go to lived instances, like when you get individuals together, my overwhelming experience has been positive.
Yeah.
And I really struggle, especially when people come to say, those evil people, maybe not literally in those words, but some form of those evil people stereotype me as being a coastal elite, and I hate that. And did you just hear yourself?
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, I said a lot there. I'll just say I said a lot there, but like,
I want to make sure I respond to the right thing. You said a lot there. No, it's true. And I feel that, if we've learned anything in the last 2 to 3 election cycles, people don't respond very well to being shamed, right? Shame is not a motivator for change. Typically, it's something that makes people shut down or ignore you or avoid. Right. And so this idea of you're bad, you voted wrong, how could you kind of stuff is not particularly effective at changing minds. So let's assume we want to change course, right? That's one thing, is it's not effective. And to your point, it's not generous, right? To reduce someone to just a stereotype these backwards ass, blah, blah. Like, no, like it's not helpful. And it's also I'm glad you shared, like, it's not your reality. And truthfully, I know a lot of really lovely people at face value who are in similar camp. And so what does that say about our assumptions and this narrative and the othering, perhaps, to go back to our previous conversation that we tend to do, right?
It also is reminding me that we're all kind of a product of this uh, acculturation into this society that is about othering people
Mhm.
and is focused
Yep.
on individualism and is prioritizing othering the majority and not focusing on the minority who is, and when I mean the minority, I mean like in numbers, like that 3%, right? Who are making a lot of these decisions, who it's like, yes, some people, half of the United States voted for Trump, right? That's just the truth, the reality.
Well, half of
The
voters.
half of the people who voted, half
Correct
of the
it.
people
Not
who
okay.
voted,
Just want to
right?
be clear.
But it's like that's a large group, obviously, right? And so that doesn't mean that every single person who voted for Trump is a racist.
Mhm.
Every single person who voted for Kamala is not an anti-racist,
That's right.
right? So it's like it's not a either or, this way of thinking that we tend to do where it's the what is it the
Dichotomy.
dichotomy,
Mhm.
right? That's not the truth. It's all gray. And if we're focused on the people and not on the systems, then we're going to keep finding ourselves in these traps because the reality is the structures and systems are broken and are enforcing and holding all of these things in place. And
Mhm.
people are supporting those systems, but it's not in the individual way that we are trying to attribute it to them, right? Some people voted for Harris because reproductive rights were their thing that was of most importance. Some people did not show up because there's a genocide that's been happening for 430 days. And the current administration has been enthusiastically supporting that
Mhm.
genocide, right? Some people didn't show up because they didn't think that either side was offering reasonable or good choices or good options. Some people showed up and voted for Trump because he said that the price of groceries would go down, right? Like
Mhm.
there are so many layers to the reasons, the logic, the explanations. But what you're saying, Jared, about starting with people first, being humans first is the step that we can't keep skipping. And that is the step that we keep skipping. That's
Mhm.
how it's so easy to propagandize and marginalize and other and sensationalize migrants and like they're criminals because we have lost focus on the fact that we are all human beings
Shared
first.
humanity. Yep.
Mhm. No, I strongly agree. And what that's making me think of is for the 2000 to 2010 decade, when a number of activist and advocacy groups were working on promoting, I'll use the language of the time and say same-sex marriage. I prefer to call it gender-neutral marriage, but same-sex marriage is the more common term. What research consistently showed there was the number one predictor of how people felt on the issue of legalizing same-sex marriage was, did you knowingly know someone who is gay, bisexual, or otherwise queer in a sexuality sense? And like that was the number one predictor.
Mm-hmm.
And
If you
to
have
me,
someone in
that
your life. Uh-huh.
right. And to me, that connects with what you're saying, Kori. We're
Mm-hmm.
all social apes at the end of the day.
Yes.
And I like to believe that we can find better versions of ourselves in certain ways and have compassionate empathy beyond our immediate experience. And not but, not or. And we also know that our lived experiences are so profound and important for how we make sense of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that like what you're saying, Kori, is, do we have those individual connections with people who differ from us, disagree? I'm thinking, going back to that decade, I'm thinking in 2004, an older gentleman came to me one day. He and I knew each other for just a couple days. And he said, Jared, I want to talk to you about same-sex marriage. And I disagree with you, I think, but I want to talk to you because I want to talk to someone different from me. And you're the first normal gay person I've met. And please don't yell at me. Is that okay? And to me, it's interesting telling the story because the number one response I get is people being offended on my behalf. And I can understand, people in my life who I would tell this to wanting to like protect me and like having certain images and things. And I can't convey his nonverbals or his tone of voice as I relate this story 20 years later. I will say I felt so touched. Like I felt like here is someone taking a risk as awkwardly as he knew how in that time to do something different, to connect to someone different, to be open to a
expand
new
his
idea.
understanding. Yes.
Right. And can we problematize like what it means? Like you're the first normal gay person I've met. Can that be problematized?
Absolutely.
Yes.
For sure.
Absolutely.
But is
But
problematizing that the most important thing? Or is the most
Right.
important thing, at least to me, the most important thing was this person's asking for my help and I am touched that he thinks I can help him. I said yes, openly and joyously. And it's really interesting because, again, most people, when I tell that story, they hear like, oh, that person, like, oh my God, he normal gay person, like, oh, he's so homophobic. It's like, you know what? Like,
he's trying to get out of it.
well, or even if he's not trying to get out of it and just trying to get into like understanding an issue from a
Yeah.
different point of view,
Yeah.
like, can we just lean into connection?
Mm.
And instead of critiquing what he's doing wrong, can we highlight what he's doing right first? Right? And
I would also like to add that the fact that he came to you also communicates that you were presenting a level of safety for him to take that risk. And I agree with what you're saying that a lot of times people don't take the risk to do something like that because the response is focusing on the negative part, like what you didn't do or say right.
Yeah, the semantics of that was a problem because.
And then that limits their desire, willingness to want to take the leap, to awkwardly ask the question and engage in an uncomfortable conversation. Because like I do these kinds of trainings all the time, and the number one barrier that I hear, this is not like real data, like this is just observational data, is like, I don't want to get it wrong. I don't want to say the wrong thing. Like one of the main barriers for people engaging in conversations across difference is the concern that they're going to say it wrong or get it wrong, and that they're going to be met with closed friction and harshness, critiquing the way in which they try to enter the conversation rather than an openness to the desire to want to engage in the conversation and then allow the conversation to happen. And we can talk about some of that awkwardness and talk about but let them get it out. Let's let people share first. Like let's give people the opportunity so that we are also developing in our understanding. Right? We are disrupting some of our own assumptions about people, about the limousine liberals and who they are, right? We are disrupting our own assumptions when we allow people to fumble and share, but share.
And it's going to come out awkward before it comes out well. Like
exactly.
That's how learning happens. Like I'm thinking
learning anything. Yes.
Like think about learning a language. Think about when you're trying to learn a new language.
Driving a car, learning a dance, anything.
And like sticking with the theme of sexuality for another moment to build off what you said, Kori, like I'm thinking of instances where I was asked like, who's the woman in the relationship? Like I got that question quite a few times. And, there are definitely some times where I just wanted to say like, no one is. That's the point of a similarly gendered relationship. Like there is no woman. That's the point. Like overwhelmingly though, when I was my better self and I felt I had the capacity in that moment, like we're not always caught at our best times.
Yes.
Like I would say, and what do you mean by that? Right. And like, am I carrying some water, proverbially speaking, for this person? Yeah. But like, they're asking a question. And if I want to help them, I'm not going to help them by critiquing being the first thing. The first thing that's going to help is trying to expand the conversation. And no one's obligated to always be on call, right? Like there
Right.
is the simultaneous struggle where everyone should be able to ask that question of like, who's the woman in the relationship, and be able to get some type of compassion and, support around unpacking what that means and where they're coming from. Like, I think that's a true thing for me. I also think it's true that statistically speaking, much smaller group of people in similarly gendered relationships, there is a cumulative stress to answering that question the 100th time.
Yeah.
And there's a complexity there between everyone should be able to ask it once, and people shouldn't be burdened with having to answer it 100 times. And that's a complex thing to navigate.
Mm-hmm.
It
Go
goes
ahead,
to your
Laura.
point about how you're not always feeling it, right? Like you're not always at your
Yeah.
best.
Oh,
So when you
I'm
feel like
really
you
not-
can and want to, fine. When you don't have to. You don't owe them that.
And when I'm really not ready for it, I just say we're both the woman and I walk away. Like that's, and
But
they
it's
can do
that-
whatever they want with that.
It's that frequency, intensity, duration, right? It's sometimes it's like, you know what? I had this conversation with your friend. Y'all need to go have some family time. Talk about it over there. Transfer the information within your friend groups to release some of the burden of from us, right? Okay, I talked with Laura about it. Now, Laura, go. Oh,
Yeah.
now.
Guess what? Laura can help you out with that one.
Yeah. Just to also just share the responsibility of the education, right? It's not all Black people's responsibility to educate everybody else about the fact that all Black people aren't criminals, all Black people aren't dangerous, right? Like, that's not my responsibility. I'm not the exception to any rule. I am the rule, right? Like, my excellence is the standard. And so your relationship and those conversations in which you are willing to have is a gift that people should view as such, right? You are not obligated to educate them, but you are demonstrating a level of compassion, care, and kindness in opening up yourself enough to help them to better understand this particular topic. But I want people to also know and believe and recognize that it's not the responsibility of somebody to do that education for you. Google is an extremely strong and powerful tool.
Or
Okay.
here's a resource that I would recommend you read. I'd love to talk with you after you read it. Something that it offloads that power off of that work
Yeah.
off of you.
And Google
Yeah.
is a strong tool. Like,
Do it yourself. Find
like
your own.
I'm just saying, like,
Yep.
put forth some effort.
Yep.
There is, it's 2024. I could see in that decade, 2000 to 2010, it's like internet is still new, learning, growing, shifting, changing, like all of that. But nowadays there is so much information out there. And I would prefer it if you could, if we could have an experiential conversation where we're talking about some experience that you had and you want some additional insight or context or how that landed on you, than a like defining conversation.
Than a basics 101 course that you could do yourself. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I think there's a lot to what both of you just said. And I connect with the idea of like the one-on-one conversations should be part of like a bouquet of efforts, right? It's not just this one flower, to go with that metaphor I just picked.
I like that. That was nice.
It's part of a bouquet. And I like the idea of, you're talking to someone you know in your life for what's specific to them, not just this identity class or this identity attribute, right? When a friend talks to me and says, hey, Jared, how did you and your ex-husband navigate cooking and other certain things in your relationship? Like when you didn't have strong gender roles that, to divide labor. Like, oh, that's a question about Jared. It's also a question about similarly gendered couples, but it's a question that's very much about me that you can't get online. right? You can't get the Jared answer to
Yes.
that online. And so it's one piece of a larger effort.
Yes.
And
It should be,
yeah,
but it isn't always. And
yes.
it should be. It should be part of a bouquet is right.
Well, and that goes back to our earlier conversation, right? What's our shared common humanity? If it's about building relationships because I want to know you and appreciate you, then you're
Mhm.
getting all of these other benefits as you go, right? You're learning about this dimension of your ableism, this dimension of your sexuality, this dimension of your gender without making it about those differences and the othering, right?
Mhm.
You're learning that in context of building those relationships.
And so, yes. And I also think it's important not to jump to certain conclusions based on identity around
Right.
that exploration.
That's
Right.
fair.
And so I think it's just really important to not, to like you were saying, Laura, to always remember the individual in the group, not put the group over the individual.
Mhm.
Also, I'm going to just say that I am not with people telling me how I'm supposed to feel
Mhm.
about
Amen.
anything.
Preach,
anything.
preach.
Like, I'm not with that. Like, if you call me anything, a nickname that other people have called me, and I don't like it coming from you, then that's the end of it. Point blank fucking period.
Mhm.
Like, I don't care what identity group I'm associated with that you think makes this acceptable. It doesn't feel good to me.
Or even who
Mhm.
you are in my life. If I don't feel that way or I don't like that, it's a stop.
Right.
Full stop.
It's like if it doesn't make me feel like, oh yeah, that's fine, or if it gives me a cringe or whatever, and I communicate that to you,
Mhm.
don't tell me how I'm supposed to feel about it. Well, you should be. No, no.
Tell me you are surprised by my reaction.
Yes.
Tell me you would not expect that.
Sure.
Tell me you see it differently. There are many ways we can have a productive conversation, but you do
Yes.
not get to put feelings in my body. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Yeah.
One of my love languages is clear communication about direct boundaries. That is one of my love languages. Thank you very much. And if you want to love me well, please respect my boundary.
Like, boom.
There you go. That's perfect for holidays, is it not? Good luck with your families. Tell them my love language is direct communication and respect of my boundaries.
That's what should be on a coffee mug.
Seriously, let me
Like
walk
this.
in there. Yeah.
Right.
Sipping at the table. Seriously. Or like, let me announce myself before I come in the room and tell you what I
Right?
like and don't like.
Or on those socks, that you can find
lounge.
everywhere. It's like on the bottom of the socks. If you can read this, you're too close. My love language is clear language. What is it? My
Clear-
love language,
Clear communication
clear communication
and respecting my boundaries.
and respecting my boundaries. Boom. That's socks right there.
That's some wisdom to end with, is it not?
I think so.
I love this.
That's a mic drop, Jared.
Thank you so much for lots of wisdom, lots of yes ands, and I think I hear you say, which I hope will be a lasting gift to I know it is to us, but also to people listening. And here's to finding what's true for an individual and treating people as fellow humans, regardless of what our assumptions might be.
Yeah.
That feels like a cheers.
And thank you both for having me today. I have felt so gracious for the gift you've given of keeping me company so many mornings with my coffee. And one of the reasons I email you both often is just like, I wish they were here so we could talk about this over coffee. Why are they not sitting here in front of me? So I'm glad that this morning with my coffee, we are sitting together and enjoying this space. It's quite a treat. Number one holiday
It's a
gift.
treat for us.
Pleasure
too.
is ours. And we should also note that you live in California and are currently recording with us at 10 o'clock our time, 7 o'clock your time, which to me says volumes about your willingness to have conversation even when it's hard. I would need a lot more hours under my belt awake.
Yeah, Laura would need a lot more coffee, okay?
I would.
A forklift to get her ass out the bed.
Although, I had my first cup of coffee in years just this past week and was like, I don't like how my body feels. I don't like how my body
Ooh.
feels. It's too much. It's too much caffeine at once for me.
Yeah.
So,
Well, it's an easy thing to do when I get to spend the morning time with to people such as yourselves, as skilled as you are in your lives and your work, as smart and nuanced as you are in your thinking and the complexity views you have towards life. And just, it's just such an energizing space to be with two of you, to explore what it means to be an awkward fluid sack of hormones, to full circle this, right? Like, that is just, it's not easy being a fluid sack, right? And I love the verve and intentionality both of you bring to that. That is more energizing than any cup of coffee.
Well,
We
damn.
appreciate you so greatly.
You're a great little sack of fluid yourself.
Thank you.
Great sack of fluid and hormones over there.
No, we love and appreciate you. And we're just happy we get to share you with the world. That's all.
Likewise.
No.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Jared Boyce, for being our first guest on Pushing Past Polite. And hopefully we'll be able to have you back on sometime.
I'd love it.
And you can connect with our audience once again. So how do we end this thing?
What happens next?
What do we say? I was like ready and then I wasn't.
Yeah, thanks for listening to Pushing Past Polite, where we talk about what matters, make the world more just. Until next time, I'm Laura.
I'm Kori and
I'm Jared.
Woohoo! Take care. Happy holidays. Be good to yourselves. Get that mug.
see y'all later. Thanks for listening to Pushing Past Polite. We encourage you to go deeper in your trusted spaces and find new space for good conversation.
You'll find episodes, transcripts, and lots of other goodies at our website, pushingpastpolitepodcast.com. You can also connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Pushing Past Polite.
Pushing Past Polite is an independent podcast with Kori and Laura from Just Educators.
Our cover art was designed by Rachel Welsh DeEga of DeEga Designs, and our audio is produced by Keith at Headset Media. Until next time, don't get stuck talking about the weather. Push past polite.
See you next time.
Jay, you did perfect.